Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I hope you still have some energy today. So to briefly introduce myself, I'm Mahdi Karabiben. I'm a co-head of product at Sifflet. We're a French data observability company. And today I want to talk about how AI is revamping and transforming product analytics. Some more context about myself. Actually, before getting into product, I spent 8 years working as a data engineer. So data was something that I would do basically day and night, every day, in different places. The last company I worked at before Sifflet was Zendesk, where I spent 3 years working on product analytics, which is very relevant to today's session, but also data quality and observability. Before that, I worked also in different industries like finance and ad tech. So when I joined Sifflet and made the switch from engineering to product, there is personal anecdote about how I wanted to create my own product management framework and tackle product management in a very data-driven way, because after all, that's what I do best when I was data engineer. And so with that, product analytics is the thing that first comes to mind when it comes to leveraging data, ensuring that you have all the right inputs to make robust product decisions. But what I realized throughout the last year is that it only works if you have 3 components. First one is that you actually need to have access to all the right data, which is sometimes all the data at the company. If I'm a product manager, I'm trying to do some analysis maybe on how a feature is getting used, and I need a piece of data from the CRM to segment users. I should be able to get that information as soon as possible in the most efficient way possible. The second component is that I need to trust the data I'm using. Having a lot of data, defining a lot of metrics is all good, but if I can't actually trust the data, if I can't say, I'm seeing a spike in the data, so that means that there's a change in usage, but maybe there's also a problem with the data or a problem with the pipeline, then having all the data isn't really valuable. And the last thing is that I need to be able to use the data without any friction. So let's say I'm using a BI tool to interact with the data, trying to understand how users are interacting with our product. I want to do some drill down analysis, or maybe I want to deep dive into a certain aspect of the usage. If I can do that in a self-serve manner, effortlessly in the same tool that I'm interacting with, then also it becomes less useful to me. And so on paper, product analytics is very useful, and having all of the data, having the tools to access it, is something that's interesting for product managers. But in reality, I realized you don't really have all of these things in most scenarios. I'm sure all of you had problems with one of these components, without which you can't really use the data. So let's start with the first one, which is using the data at scale and having access to all the right data. In a typical scenario, again, maybe I'm a product manager, I need to access to some CRM data, and I'll look at our data platform, and we actually don't have the data on the platform. It's still living in CRM. In an ideal world, I would be able to get that data as soon as possible, but in today's environment, I actually have to go through an analyst who will then need to go and modify the code, maybe talk to a data engineer, and then a few weeks later, I would have access to the data, but it's too late. I already made the decision about the data, and then now I'm working on something else. So data teams, unfortunately, are still a bottleneck. It's not a problem with the data teams. It's a team that manages different stakeholders, not only product use cases, and today, unfortunately, it impacts how, as a product manager, you can access the data. The second problem is data quality. So here, it sounds obvious. When you look at a metric, I'm sure you always have a small tingle that, okay, I'm seeing a spike in the data, but maybe something went behind the scenes. Maybe someone modified the code. Maybe there's a pipeline that has an issue. Maybe the data itself has a problem. So you're never 100% sure that what you're seeing on your dashboard is actually accurate, because there are so many things that can go wrong. And so what you would do, you would go to an analyst and say, hey, I'm seeing this spike in the data. It sounds odd. Can you go and take a look? And so this analyst will need to then see if something happened in the pipeline or if there's a problem with the code to ensure that, yes, you can actually make a decision based on the data. And maybe they come back to you a few days later or sometimes weeks later saying, oh, you know what? Someone modified the code, and now it's a completely different logic upstream, and that's why you're seeing more data. It's not more users. It's just a problem of the code. So data quality, it's still very difficult to assess. And the third thing, third component I want to talk about is having access to the data in a frictionless manner. here, if I'm product manager, let's say I'm doing some analysis on how some enterprise customers interact with a feature that we released. And then I say, okay, what's the next action they do after they interact with this feature? That means I need to interact with our own data tools to maybe modify a chart or maybe access some additional data set that has the event that's happening after the user performs the interaction with the data. The problem here, it's either using tools that are really restricting for product managers, so the dashboard itself is not intuitive enough for me. And if I go and modify the data directly, or if I want to query the data directly in SQL, it's a complex data model. There are a lot of tables I need to navigate. I need to understand exactly what's happening behind the scenes. In most cases, I'll just, again, Slack an analyst and say, hey, can you help me with this? I want to do this analysis, and I'm having a problem with it. So here again, the data is available, but it's not accessible in a frictionless, self-serve manner. I still need to go through someone before I can make the decision. Here again, I lose time, maybe days, weeks, and sometimes I don't even have the answer, even after that period. The good news is that it's changing. And the idea today is to talk about these three components and how with AI, we can dramatically reduce the friction and how much time we lose on all of these components. So with AI, we'll see how it makes things more scalable. It enforces trust in the data, and it makes it much more accessible. So let's start with scalability. In the pre-AI world, there were two main problems that made accessibility difficult to obtain in product analytics. First one, if you want to change existing data sets or existing pipelines, you had to go through the data team. You had to need to work with a data engineer or data analyst. So again, the data team was a bottleneck. And then, even for the data team, once they want to make the update that you're requesting, it's a very complex process. It takes them a lot of time. Maybe it takes days, sometimes takes weeks, to bring a new data set from an upstream system, maybe your CRM or your ERP, or even make changes to an existing pipeline. What AI is doing is two things. First, with AI code assistance, this is something that we talked about a lot today, whether it's Cursor, whether it's something more data-specific like dbt, it makes it much more easier for someone who's not technical, again, maybe a product manager or even another persona, to come and clarify that need, specify what they need to modify in the data, and interact directly with the data via the AI itself. And the second way in which it's making things much more streamlined is that it simplifies and it automates a lot of the steps that you need to go through between the time in which you actually need a new data set and the time in which the data set is in production. So to go through like a practical example, let's imagine the scenario before we had AI assistance. So I'm a product manager, I need a new data set to maybe analyze how new feature is getting used. I would need to go to an analyst and say, hey, actually, can you work on this data set and bring it to the tool I'm using, whether it's a BI tool or a notebook? The analyst will add that ticket to their backlog. Maybe in a few days or a few weeks later, they will do the work, they will raise the pull request, but then they will realize, oh, to make this work, we need to have the data from that other system. Maybe it's product team that needs to generate a new event, or maybe it's a new feed that we need to create. So there's data engineer that needs to be involved, and the data engineer needs to work on the pipeline. A month later, I have the data, but it's unfortunately too late. In the AI-based scenario, as a product manager, I start with the same problem. I need to do some analysis, but I'm lacking some data. Instead of going directly to the analyst, I can go to the AI-based code assistant, and I can clarify my need and say, there's this data set that contains data about our customers. I need new attributes, or maybe I need new information about the customers to use in my analysis. The AI can make the code change, but doesn't necessarily need to merge it on its own. It can ask for feedback from the analyst. And the analyst here, instead of having to do everything on their side and having to do the work in their own workflow, there's the AI that comes in between, makes the code change, raises pull request, and the analyst will just approve if it's fine, or they can say, oh, there's a problem here, we need to do things differently because of this or because of that. Same thing with the data engineer. Most of the pipelines that bring data from one system to another are very easy scenarios for AIs to come and replicate and to come and augment. So let's say we have a pipeline that's bringing data from the CRM, you want to add a new table, this is a very good fit for an AI-based use case. The model can look at the existing pipelines and can say, okay, we have 4 pipelines that do things this way. I'm going to add a new one. And then the data engineer will come and say, yeah, this makes sense. It looks good. Or they can say, no, we need to tweak it in some way or another. Here again, it went from the data engineer and the analyst doing things end-to-end to the AI doing 90% of the work and the human being just a validator. They just need to say whether it makes sense or whether we need to do things differently. So now we come to trust, which is a little more tricky. Because here the problem is that there are so many moving pieces when you want to interact with the data. It's not just about the metric or the number you see on the screen. It's about the code that was written upstream by different people and different data engineering teams. It's about all the systems that the data moves through. It can be your pipeline, it can be your data warehouse, and also about the data itself. Maybe someone inserted wrong data in some upstream system and you didn't test it correctly. And so in the pre-AI world, it was very difficult to get to the 100% certainty that the data is fine, that I can use it. It was always similar to an engineer telling you, this bridge is 80% safe to cross. I'm sure most of you wouldn't cross the bridge. And so with AI, that changes basically with AI agents. And this is something that we're actively working on at Sifflet. So this is something that's really happening right now. It's not just bullet points I'm typing for fun. AI agents are making things much more streamlined when it comes to looking at the whole landscape, looking at all the moving pieces, and determining if the data is safe to use in quite a few different ways. First one is looking at different signals. So looking at the signals from the logs of the data, of the tools that move the data, looking at the data itself, looking at the code changes in GitHub or in GitLab, and then deciding if you actually have a problem or not. If you have a problem, another AI agent can help you with understanding what went wrong. So the agent will go and look at the logs, will go and look at the code changes, and then it will say, oh, actually someone modified the code, and now we have a new filter that makes the data much more problematic, or maybe you have more data or less data. Once you reach that point, you can actually also alert the right people using an AI agent that will look at the impact of that problem. Maybe your dashboard is getting impacted, or maybe another PM is getting impacted. So it will notify the right people with exactly what happened and what they can do about it. And finally, when it comes to resolution, you can also have an AI agent that will look at the problem, look at the code, and determine the most efficient way to resolve it. So this is something that's also very helpful, mostly to the data team, but even for product managers, it's helpful to see the resolution that's recommended and how much time it will take. So to give you a more practical image of it, when the AI tells you that the data is fine, it's very different from the assumption you might make when you look at the metric on your own. Because what's happening behind the scenes is that there are multiple agents running in real time, looking at the code, looking at the system logs, looking at the queries that were executed on the data platform, looking at the data itself, and all of them are retrieving signals about what's happening, and all of them are determining whether the data is fine or not. So when you have a message saying the data is fine, or maybe the data has a problem, you finally reach that 100% certainty. It's no longer an 80%, or maybe there's some feed that we're not monitoring, or maybe there's some tool that modifies the data and no one looked at it. An example that's maybe more familiar to all of you is that historically, again, as a product manager or as any persona who interacts with the data, you see a number that feels wrong on the dashboard. Maybe it's too high, maybe it's too low. And what you would usually do, you would go to Slack or to Teams, send a message to someone from the data team saying, I have this dashboard, I have this metric, and today it feels odd, like the number doesn't feel correct. Can you look into it? And it goes back to the scenario we walked through in which they have to spend days looking at different systems, who changed what, which engineers worked on which pull request, and so on, before you get your answer. Today, what happens, you go to the dashboard, you see the metric, you see that something doesn't feel right, it changed drastically from one day to another, but you also have a message from the AI saying, hey, I know this number feels a little odd, There was a change that was merged yesterday that modified how we calculate this number, and now we're including data from maybe a new website that we acquired or maybe a new feed of data. And it's completely intentional, it's fine, you can trust the number that you're seeing. Or maybe if it's not fine, the AI would still tell you exactly what happened and exactly the reasoning behind the change. And this means that you have so much more trust in the data, and you can finally make decisions based on the data. You can be data-driven without that little scary tickle in the back of your mind saying, maybe it's not correct. Today you can for sure know that it's correct. And now we're moving to accessibility, which is the third component. Here, the main two problems that we had in the past were, first, the tools that you would interact with as product manager are very restrictive. We have a lot of sophisticated BI tools that can interact with the data in visual manner. You can use notebooks, you can use your own product analytics tool UI. But the problem is, the moment you want to dive deeper, the moment you want to do some maybe different analysis, maybe you want to look at two different metrics and how they change over time, and you want to combine them with another event that's coming from another system. It gets tricky, it gets complicated. So you say, okay, let me go to the data platform and try to do this in SQL. The problem is, you go to the data platform, even if you're comfortable with SQL, the data model is complex, you have lots of tables, you're not sure which data is in which table, you don't have sufficient documentation, and so you really can't do much. AI changes this in quite a few ways. The easy one is text to SQL. So now you can type things in natural language, you don't have a technical barrier of doing SQL directly, and the AI will go and generate the SQL for you. But it does so much more, and you have many ways in which the AI can be of use here. The second one is code explainability. So you have maybe some complex logic that's generating segments or that's generating certain information in your tables, and you're not sure how to interpret it. Historically, you had to go to the analyst and you had to ask them about what was happening to understand that bit of code. But now the AI can explain it to you in natural language. You can ask it about it, and it can give you an answer. The third one is the description, the metadata that we lack today. We have a lot of data, we have lots of tables, but we don't have sufficient context about what's in this table or what does this column mean exactly. The AI can look at the data, can look at all the systems that it moves through, and it can generate that metadata for you. It can tell you that this table contains users, but it has a problem in the sense that certain users are not included in the table because they was filtered for one reason or another. And lastly, all of this culminates in you having your own world-class data analyst available 24/7. Historically, a big point of friction for product managers was where you hit a point where you need help from maybe a data analyst or someone who's an expert of the data. And today, that's accessible 24/7 and built in within the tools that you use on a daily basis. So to talk about two practical examples here, this one is the obvious one. So you have a question about the data or about maybe a feature that you're tracking. And instead of you having to look at the data, trying to understand how the tables are connected, you can provide your natural language request. The AI would go and look at the data, will go and generate the query based on the data itself, and also based on the data, will say, okay, what's the most suitable chart for this scenario? What's the most suitable chart to show you exactly why this data matters, or what's the variation of the data that you need to look into? And the other example that's also just as interesting is code explainability that we talked about. So here I have a very complex bit of code in SQL to generate the type of a customer. And as a PM, I look at it, and I'm not certain what would happen in a given scenario. Like I say, if this happens, what would this code generate? Historically, I would ask someone from the data team, wait for the response. Today, I can ask the AI directly, and the AI would come back with an answer detailing exactly what this code means and exactly what would happen in the scenario that I'm describing. So to sum up, all of these changes are making things much more streamlined in product analytics by first allowing you to get faster insights. You move from weeks and days of waiting for someone to do something to hours and even minutes of AI-based automation. Decisions get better because finally you can use the data and you can actually trust it. You have much more efficiency because you no longer need to spend time on data wrangling, on trying to understand how does this table connect to this other table, or can I actually trust this data? What's happening in this pipeline? Is it down? Is it working? All of that gets automated, and you get to focus on strategy, you get to focus on product, and you get to focus on the things that you do best. And finally, all of this also means that you get to experiment much faster. Interacting with the data becomes much more streamlined, even in scenarios where you don't know the data model or you're not familiar with certain tables. All of that gets automated. You get so much more support from the AI. And again, it feels as if you're collaborating with a top-notch data analyst who's always there, always ready to answer your questions. Thank you very much. This was my talk about data products.